Trick-or-treating was something I always loved as a kid. It's something that I was too old for. Being 25 is something that easily puts a damper on childish festives, and being pregnant makes it even more difficult to join in on the fun. These aren't many happy families that take kindly to an adult wearing a vampire costume showing up on their doorstep to beg for candy. With an obvious baby bump to boot, the next year would be difficult because I'd be taking my pride and joy around the block. But that year, I had to deal being too grown up for trick-or-treating, just as I'd had every year since I turned 16. That doesn't mean that I didn't dress up or that I wouldn't be roaming the streets after dark. That just means that I wouldn't be going from house to house in search of delicious treats. That year, I dressed up like a vampire. I thought it would be a little funny because of my large stomach. I was since 6 months along, but I was showing pretty much a lot. I guess I ate a little too much for my own good or something, but that was okay. I was eating for two. I decided to wear a tight black dress with spider fishnet leggings. I had on a Monica-style wig and donned a pair of fangs behind blood, red lips, and with pride. I didn't have money for a costume, so this was all the stuff I'd found in my closet from years before. Maybe that's a statement of how much I love Halloween. Either way, I decided I would carry out the old age tradition by passing out candy before the midnight stroll. Being outside in the open air was the witching hour was always something that I found thrilling about Halloween. It was as if the night had held a hint of magic that I wasn't allowed to forget and didn't want to. It was intoxicating, and I was intended on keeping both traditions culturally and personally alive. I had a big bowl of candy waiting for the kiddies, and my costume on almost an hour before everyone, even before they had showed up. I passed the time waiting on the little ones by watching old horror movies. I had a set of movies all picked up from The Blob to the Amityville Horror. Every time I heard a knock at the door, I hit pause and jumped up as fast as any pregnant lady would. I was always happy to rush to the door, grab my bowl of treats, and greet the little guys and ghouls at my doorstep. The kids that came by were so cute. I saw princesses, Power Rangers, witches, other vampire kin, and even a tiny baby in the most adorable pumpkin costume. It was marvelous to see all the other Halloween lovers. As the sky descended into darkness, I became more and more excited. It was getting so close to the time that I could take my walk. The piece of candy left in my bowl had dwindled so much that the plastic bottom of the Tupperware was visible, and the trick-or-treaters were starting to get home less and less frequently. At 11:30 p.m., I hadn't heard the door in a while, and the last movie was almost over. Easing myself up, I started to stretch. It wouldn't be so bad if I went out a little early. With a sigh, I was ready to end the first tradition, one wordless passed down from adult to grown child over the years, and began the one I always enjoyed the most. It was time to walk out into the night and soak in some of the magic in the air. As I went for my keys, I was startled by a knock at my door. My hand went to my chest and I laughed softly at myself as I walked over and took up my bowl of candy. I already didn't need the rest of it, but I still grabbed a couple pieces and set them on the table before opening the door. Outside, there was an elderly woman and a small, thin child. The woman had her white hair tucked into a rigged bun. She had more wrinkles than a Shar-Pei pup and the brightest blue eyes I'd ever seen. She was a big lady, but she wore an almost elegant yet simple blue dress that hung all the way down to her sandaled feet. The child was a little unnerving to look at. Her hair was brown and matted in the areas with something dark red, almost as if it was matted with blood. It had to be a wig. It was so thick and long. The mats in it seemed coarse and impossibly large. She had to be an old-fashioned nightgown that she was tattered around, it seemed, and smuggled with dirt. It was a great costume. In fact, it was the most elaborate costume that I'd seen all night. I grinned at her, exposing my vampire fangs, and said, "Well, hello, pretties. You're just in time for some treats on the night of trickery." My spiel made the old lady smile, but I didn't hear a peep from the little girl. I was about to lean down and allow her to take some candy from the bowl. I guess she was just shy, and I wasn't about to make her stick around if she didn't want to. However, before I could do so, the old lady said to the little girl, "Say trick or treat to the nice lady." After a moment of silence, I shrugged more to myself than anyone else. In the kindest tone I had heard, I told the little girl, "It's okay. I know what it's like to be shy. This can be pretty scary, huh? I'll tell you what. I have about 15 pieces or more of candy left in my bowl. If you open up your bag and tell me thank you before you go, you can have them all. I intended to give this little girl as much of the candy as she wanted that was left in my bowl to begin with, but it was obvious that her grandmother wanted her to talk. I wanted to give the little girl a nice Halloween, but I didn't want her to step on her grandmother's toes either. Even though I couldn't see her face, under the mist of matted hair, I was certain there was a sweet child underneath. If she was willing to put that much effort into her costume, she was almost like a kindred spirit. I knew in my heart she deserved a wonderful Halloween. I really hoped I could help. Being shy and trick-or-treating can be very taxing. She lifted her sack and opened it. It was small, as if made of a large blue plaid handkerchief. There was already a couple pieces of candy in it, but not many. It struck me as odd because a little girl like her had to have been trick-or-treating for a while. As I tilted the bowl toward the opening, I heard a tiny whisper saying, "Thank you." After dumping the contents of bowls into her bag, I smiled at her. I got my thank you, no matter how quietly. The woman smiled back at me and put a hand on the little girl's shoulder. She guided her away towards the street, so that she could disappear into the night. I stepped back inside with my bowl and set it on the table. I had a warm feeling inside my heart, because I knew I had done something good for her. I took my time gathering my keys and my cell phone. I was giving those two time to get some distance. I liked them, but I wanted to walk alone and uninterrupted by others. It was just going to be me and my unborn baby, enjoying the night of Halloween in its last few moments of the year. I was excited when I left my home and locked my door behind me. As I wandered down the streets in the opposite direction than what I saw the lady go with the child, I took a big deep breath of cool night air. I meandered down the twisting streets with my hand idly resting on the curve of my belly. I found myself doing this more and more as my pregnancy progressed. The more aware I was of my baby growing inside me, the more and more anxious I was to meet him or her. I could hardly wait to share this walk with my child next year. For that year, he or she I chose to wait to learn the gender would just have to be cradled in my stomach. Eventually, I came across a road with one long street lamp. The yellow glow shining through the darkness was actually a little creepy, but in the spirit of the holiday, I had to check it out. I slowly made my way towards it, enjoying the ambiance of the cool night air and the silence of the nearing midnight hour, until I saw a figure standing in the light. It took a moment, but I suddenly realized it was the girl from before. That hair was matted in her face, and the dress looked dirty and tattered. There was no way it could be anyone but her. The sight of her stopped me in my tracks. Should I go talk to her? Where was her grandmother? What was she doing all the way over here? I decided I had to help her. Anything less would be wrong, and I knew it, but there was something about the situation that sent a chill up my spine. Despite my discomfort, I approached her. I didn't say a word until I reached the edge of the light. For a moment, she just stood there, facing me in the silence. I had my hand pressed against my stomach, and she had her fingers wrapped tightly around the top of her small blue bag. I cleared my throat and asked, "What are you doing all the way out here all by yourself? Do you need some help?" My heart raced, so I waited for a response. Without a second, she took a step forward. When I didn't move, she took another step. I was about to repeat my question, when she took a flurry of steps in my direction. The moment never revealed her face. It merely made her hair and dress sway as if pressed against a gentle breeze. The more I looked at her hair, the more the mats looked real. The areas of the blood substance looked gooey and dark. They glistened like a fresh wound. It was strange. Her costume was so elaborated, but she still wouldn't talk. I heard her bare feet on the sidewalk before I even looked down to see that she wasn't wearing any shoes. This girl was so odd, but I was intent on helping her. Why was she out here all alone? "Little girl?" I asked, hearing a quiet sliver in my own voice as I spoke. "Do you need any help?" Her hand shot out and it landed on my stomach. It was unusually cold, as if she was pressing an ice cube on my body. I gasped and nearly took a step back, but I was frozen in place, as if I couldn't move, even if I wanted to. Finally, she lifted her head. That hair plastered against the counter of her face so that I could make out the indentions of her eyes and a small slope of nose. Her bag dropped to the ground, and I heard the candy spill out on the concrete. As I stared down at her, it was hard to breathe. I started to feel dizzy. My knees began to sink towards the ground. She lifted her hand and abruptly pulled her hair to the side. All I could see was her dark brown eyes in the moment. Those eyes were so intense that I couldn't look away. She seemed to be pleading with me. There was so much sadness in that gaze that I felt tears streaming out of the corners of my eye before I even knew I was crying. The world around them began to fade to darkness until there was absolutely nothing. It was like I closed my eyes and all it went away. I didn't know how long I was out, but when I awoke, I looked around. I was laying on the ground with candy spraying all over me. My head was sore, but my biggest worry was the dull pain I felt in my stomach. I had fallen in a pain like that couldn't be ignored. I fumbled around for my phone without getting up. I didn't want to do anything that might harm my baby. I had to be cautious as I dialed for an ambulance. I looked around for the little girl, and I couldn't find her anywhere. A few hours later, I was in a hospital bed in the emergency room. I had been rushed there to get checked out. So far, all I knew was there was a knot on the back of my head and a bruise on my rump. I had a blood test, a scan or two, and an ultrasound done. I was getting frustrated and even more worried as time passed. It seemed to take ages, but a doctor eventually found their way to the foot of my bed. He smiled at me and said, "Miss Anderson, I'm happy to tell you that everything is fine. Your bruises should heal up nicely. You don't have a concussion, and there's nothing wrong with your baby. I do have news, though. The reason we've been doing so many tests is because the ultrasound technician thought she'd heard 2 heartbeats. We didn't want to alarm you further until we knew. But, ma'am, you're having twins. Congrats." With a big goofy smile, he didn't even wait for me to respond. He left me to deal with the news, saying that a nurse would be in to release me soon. I'd put a hand on my belly and couldn't believe that there was 2 of them in there. Why hadn't anyone caught that before? How long would it have been for them to catch on to that if I had twins? If I hadn't had the altercation with that little girl? Everything I could remember was really confusing. I could only guess that she pushed me or that I had passed out for some reason. Nothing made sense anymore. As I tried to take it all in, a nurse walked into the room. I looked up and saw the old woman from before, only in a light blue scrub. She gave me a worried smile and approached my bedside. The world around me seemed to waver and I began to feel dizzy again. It was a good thing I was lying down because I think I would have fallen over if it wasn't for that. Were they sure I didn't have a concussion? She came to me and put a soft warm hand on my stomach, and a gentle stroke she told me, "Don't be scared. There's nothing wrong with the little girl you're carrying now. She'll be a sister to your son, and I'm sure you'll love them both dearly. That girl, she only knew sorrow and agony in her short life. You are her chance to try again. Feel free to rejoice." I was feeling began to fade. I felt myself shake it off as I heard a new voice tell me, "Okay, Miss Anderson, I got the IV out and you can go home." I looked up to see a young brunette nurse with a chart in her hands and at the end of the bed. The old woman was gone, but I could the residual heat from her hand on my stomach. I was so astounded that I couldn't say a word. The nurse didn't seem to mind. She got the IV out swiftly and showed me to the front desk. Even as I filled out the papers and signed forms, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I was in a daze. It wasn't until I started asking the receptionist about talking to the older nurse that was in the room that it finally hit me. The old woman said I was pregnant with a boy and a girl. She was clearly referring to the little girl from before. How was that possible? Where had she gone? I couldn't find anyone that knew who I was talking about, and I eventually called a ride home before they readmitted me for further inspection. Just 3 months later, I gave birth to 2 healthy babies. My family was delighted to have twins brought into the family. Their father created more distance by disappearing to his mother's house an entire state away. I was fine with that. He still had to pay child support. I had my family. I had my little boy with sky blue eyes and his bald head. I had my little girl that came out with eyes as dark as the earth and enough fuzzy brown hair to be the talk of the town. I never forgot about the night of trickery in which she found me. I guess I got the treat after all.